artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, here we are at episode 276. As we use AI more and more as a critical assistant, what might that be doing to our critical thinking? My guest today, Professor Michael Gerlich, has published a paper in the peer-reviewed journal Societies on his research study showing that younger participants, quote, exhibited higher dependence on AI tools and lower critical thinking scores compared to older participants, end quote. That's the sort of result that demands we pay attention at a time when AI is being increasingly used by schools and students. Michael is the head of Center for Strategic Corporate Foresight and Sustainability at SBS Swiss Business School. His research and publications largely focus on the societal impact of artificial intelligence, which has made him in demand as a speaker around the world. He's also taught at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Cambridge, and other institutions. He's also been an advisor to the President and the Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan, the Uzbekistan Cabinet, and Ministers of Economic Affairs in Azerbaijan. We're going to talk about that study and another one that is in the publication phase and what they tell us about cognitive offloading and the use of GenAI. Why is it different from using calculators, which were widely forecast to cause math skills to atrophy and were banned from schools? Yes, I do go back that far, and we since learned better. Michael will look at how AI, like the big agents that might come with workplace IT systems, help or hinder in knowledge work and consequences for on-the-job training. So let's get into the interview. Michael Gerlich, it's a pleasure to welcome you to AI and You. And I want to talk about your paper that came out this January titled AI Tools in Society, Impacts on Cognitive Offloading and the Future of Critical Thinking, which has gotten a great deal of attention for its very important subject matter. I wonder if you could summarize in your own words the conclusions of this study for us.
Yeah. So we were studying how does extensive use of GenAI, and specifically what we were looking at, it was ChatGPT, has an impact on people's cognitive offloading and then the critical thinking. The study we conducted was in the UK. And to summarize the outcome, it is not just by that study and following studies as well, that the use of GenAI leads in a majority of cases to cognitive offloading, meaning the thinking process is being offloaded. That's important, not just the data that we have on our minds is being offloaded, which leads to less critical thinking. And the reason for that is because as soon as we get a relatively good answer from GenAI, we trust GenAI, and then we let it do more work for us. And with that, we don't think ourselves anymore that extensively as we did before. And as I said, this was not just specifically in that study, because that led to another study, which is currently in publication process, which actually highlights the problem even more, that it is really difficult to use GenAI without cognitive offloading, meaning that you are not asking the AI to give you directly the final result or the answer to your question. And that is actually very difficult. What our study showed in January, for young people and people with a lower education, which makes sense, right? And people who are already older or have a higher level of education, and they use GenAI a little bit more critical. They don't trust GenAI as quickly, so they interact more and they still think more. Then young people do that with less experience and less, depending now on the educational level, interaction with critical thinking.
Thank you. I really want to dig into the definitions and meanings here, because this is such a important distinction that we need to make here. And you're especially highlighting something which I think is really critical, which is that the older people who have already had the benefit of an education and a childhood that didn't encompass or include generative AI may have learned skills that students and children who do have that available to them might not get, either as a result of education changing or as a result of the environment that they grow up in. And if that's an illusion that is deleterious, then that's something that really behooves us to understand well. And this phrase, cognitive offloading, I mean, on the face of it, that doesn't sound bad. It sounds like the calculator argument. It sounds like, well, I'm offloading the task of calculating square roots to this little box on my desk, and I think of that as a good thing. So why is cognitive offloading not the calculator argument?
No, absolutely, you're right. And this is the most important question that you're asking, right? So we have this argument that humans were having cognitive offloading since they exist, and that's correct, right? So first we were pretty much in caves in the walls, we were recording things, and then we created books where we were offloading information and we could store it, and then it went further on, and you actually used then now examples that come closer to the cognitive offloading definitions that we use. With a calculator or with the internet, generally, we had already with the Google effect, we were afraid that people might no longer think anymore by themselves. But the big difference is, and that's what I said at the beginning, cognitive offloading only means that I don't have to store information. I don't have to use things in my brain. I can offload it, and now I can use my brain for something else, right? So it frees up brain space. And that's generally good. You're absolutely right. Problem, though, is that in the past, except for calculating, that was just a very small area of our life, it could actually think for us. And this is very limited thinking. Or another example is the navigation system in your car, right? So you might remember that you were still traveling by car and had those paper maps, and you had to know your way and have to think about that. It's all good. And another example was always remembering the phone numbers when you were young, and now it's all in your phone and you remember none of those. But these are all different kinds of cognitive offloading, right? Some of them, like for example, the navigation system, come closer to the critical thinking part, to the thinking. You don't have to think for yourself, but I'm saying specifically closer, right? It is not replacing my thinking in the car. So while I trust now more the navigation system, and I might end up somewhere where I don't want to be, and that happened, I'm sure, to thousands of people at one point in their life, but I'm still thinking myself, right, while I do that. Now, with GenAI, it's differently. I ask the question, and it gives me directly the final solution, the answer, without me even thinking. And that is different. Now, why is it so different and so important? Because it is not just limited to one small area of our life, like the calculator. How often a day do you use a calculator, Peter? Once? Twice? I don't know. Depending on the job probably that you have, not that often. Maybe you use it once a week. So you still think all the rest of the time. Now, GenAI offers you to think for you pretty much all the time. And I just had, not the last weekend, the weekend before, we had an executive education course, and we had people coming in. They were coming from different countries. And I was asking, because I did the part of AI I taught there, and I was asking the participants, and they're all in their late, mid-30s to up to 50 years they were. I was asking, who of you is using GenAI? Everybody's using it. And then I asked, okay, for what do you use it? And there were actually participants who said, well, pretty much I use it for everything, right? And that's the problem, because you can use it for everything. And whether it is now for you on the job, whether it is when you plan your next trip, it doesn't matter. You say what you want and it does it for you. And it can think for you, right? So you don't have to think anymore. So imagine either your boss on the job asks you a question, gives you a task, or a university professor or a teacher at school asks you a question. And instead of you even thinking about it, you just enter exactly that question into your GenAI and it gives you the answer. So what was your cognitive contribution to the context? Was pretty much just that you had to be able to remember the question and type it in or speak to the GenAIs and ask the question. This is where the difference is, right? The cognitive offloading of the thinking. It thinks for you and it offers you the opportunity to say, let me think for you and I give you the solution. And that's where the difference is.
And I'm really focused on the community that I'm serving the most here, which is educators, because they have the hardest job at the moment of trying to teach people, and children that have the exposure to AI that has both the potential of increasing their learning, there are studies showing that, and impairing their critical thinking, as yours and other studies show. And so some of the distinctions we might need to draw here are in words that are very familiar but encompass a multitude of sins, shall we say, like think. Can we break down thinking into different components which are affected differently by AI, like critical thinking, creativity, ideation, and so forth? Are there distinctions that can be made there that help us?
Well, unfortunately, all of those that you were just naming are impacted by GenAI, right? While we are saying, and you can, when you look in social media, I don't know what your go-to social media is. I just by my job have to permanently go through social media and analyze it. You can see whether it's on Instagram or wherever you are, that everybody offers you the 10 best prompts they teach you all on GenAI. Whether it's creativity, that you are more creative, it can do now the creative stuff for you as well, or whether it is now, it goes for efficiency or it goes for simple tasks. Unfortunately, all kinds of thinking that you were just describing get impacted by AI. And let me help you a little bit to understand why this is. Now, in the aftermath of the study, I've been approached by educators from around the world, and they asked me whether I could offer actually and can do a professional development workshop for teachers and university professors how to teach to use GenAI correctly. And while doing so, we realized that the problem applies pretty much to everyone, that as soon as they have the AI, they ask the question. Now, in those workshops, I had as well professors sitting, and they said, Michael, what is the big problem if I ask first the AI and then I do the critical thinking afterwards? And let me explain a little bit to you. I mean, we have what we call the anchoring bias, for example. Our brain gets most impact by the first information that we receive. Now, this is as well where you have to be very careful. If two people are quarreling, you are either the teacher or the supervisor. The first person that you will interview, the information will have more impact on you than the second person. You just have to be aware of that. That's what's happening in our brain. That's normal. And the same happens when you don't think about it. You ask AI, it gives you a solution, and this already limits your further critical thinking, even if you then want to start as a critical thinker, because our brain works differently. And the same is with creativity. Now we can all argue, okay, but we humans are more creative. And then you see that whether it's in the music industry, they are saying use AI to compose your music, or it creates artwork, where the question comes, is it art if it's being created by AI? There is no limitation where, let's say, Gen AI can impact thinking, all levels of thinking, right? And this is where the risk is as well. If we could limit it to one part, we could isolate it and could train people just, focus on this one part, and all the other parts you still can do on your own. The problem is that it's being promoted as the universal answer to all of your problems. So you can use it whether you want to be creative. It can run your social media for you. It can respond for you. It can do your homework. It can do whatever it is, right? And that's where the problem is. We cannot limit it to one level of thinking.
I definitely resonate with what you're saying about the hype and the marketing there. And I wanted to describe an experience that I've had recently with it, where I'm going to make a presentation on something that is something I haven't done for a while. And I was looking at the assignment and I was thinking, where do I start? And I was getting that writer's block thing. So I'm not going to ask GenAI to write it for me. I know better than that. And I have a voice. I have a distinctive voice. I've written things. I've had decades to develop that in. It's not going to reproduce my voice, nor am I going to let it have the fun of creating that voice. So I'm not going to ask it for final product, but I asked it for an outline and it got me started. It was great, but then I was going over this and I was feeling like it was just wading through mud. And I was asking myself, well, why is this difficult at this point when I've got this great start? And it seemed to me that it was because I was reading what something or someone else had written, that I had to take that on board, and that did not create in me the same understanding as I would have if I had written the outline myself, because that would simply be shorthand for a whole lot of cognitive state that would get me further. And now I'm trying to reproduce that cognitive state by reading this, and language is the limitation here, right? It's an encoding. And so I'm trying to keep going, and I still, on balance, think that it is better than me staring at the blank page for who knows how long it would have taken. But it certainly seems that that is a process that a student who has not had decades of experience in creating these things is going to have a very hard time deciding where to draw the boundary between them and the AI, particularly if they've got an assignment due tomorrow night. How does that comport with your findings, and where else can you illuminate this phenomenon?
Well, I mean, you pretty much put your finger on the wound. The thing is, we have to understand, first of all, how large language models work. The name says it. These are language models. They are brilliant in formulating perfect sentences, right? Now, imagine young people who are not that experienced, who don't have the self-confidence in the language on the topic. They read now something that sounds really brilliant, right? It's being formulated brilliantly. It has content. It makes sense. But in the end, it is a language model. Even GenAI is not the expert on the topic. It will create a response on. And you can ask GenAI, ask your ChatGPT, your Gemini, or your Claude, whatever your go-to is, ask it whether it understands the content. It doesn't. What it does, it will recognize patterns in documents related to that topic, and it will then predict the perfect answer word by word, but in such brilliant language that impresses, obviously, young and less experienced readers or users in such a way that they get obviously more impacted than you. Because like you said, you're experienced, you already have your own voice, and you have critical thinking about that, right? You feel something is not fitting. If you're not familiar with the topic, that's what young people, students have, because they're still studying. And they're not really very good in writing. I mean, who is really good in writing? It takes forever to become really proficient in writing. It's not just about, your own language, but to write in a smart sounding way, that takes a long time. And this is as well what the study has shown. And other studies, by the way, right? What we call the MIT study, they did the same with knowledge workers. They were looking on the confidence levels of the users, right? And people with less self-confidence, they would offload the thinking process more. They would trust AI faster. And in result, even worse, they would become overconfident about their own capabilities, although they don't have it, right? And people who have a higher level of self-confidence, they would use GenAI in a more critical way, would have less cognitive offloading, and would still be more critical in interacting. So all this pretty much comes back to what you are saying. The problem is when we talk about students, pupils, young people, they are not yet there on the level. They have not experienced the critical thinking. To critical thinking relates as well to experience. How can I think about something critically where I have no experience in that field, where I don't have even knowledge about the content? And this is where then GenAI becomes really difficult. Once you're already familiar in your field, like you, where you're saying, right, the writing side, yes, you have a writer's block, but still you're a good writer, you have years and years of experience. And this is when you start, let's say, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, and you have to write something. They don't have your experience. Their writer's block will end up probably being impressed what GenAI is offering, and they will just take it, even if they don't want to. But it is, I mean, come on, because you don't have the self-confidence. You believe that GenAI can do better than you. And obviously, you will take the result that is better than your own. I mean, who wouldn't do that? And that has a huge impact on young people, people with less experience, less education yet than, for example, older people like you. And you identify it already. The problem is that if you don't identify, the feeling that you had that you didn't really, it helps you a little bit, but somehow it didn't really feel that it's you, and it might not have created the result that you wished for. Now, those workshops and another study that is currently in publication process has shown that even high-level critical thinkers, when using GenAI, they directly offload, because automatically they would ask the wrong question. They directly would ask the question that leads to cognitive offloading, right? And this is because it is really difficult to use it as a research tool rather than a thinking tool. But it invites us. It offers this convenience trap where nearly everybody goes into, and it's very hard to get out of that.
Well, and you're really highlighting for me here a very dangerous trap, which is the loss of our voice, that I'm very attached to my writing voice. I've curated it, I've come to love it, and I love expressing it. And the idea of losing that voice is alarming, to say the least. But the idea that a student might never discover their voice is like them never becoming who they really are. And that's a crime. Now, there are degrees of this because many students grow up to be adults whose professions don't demand a writing voice. That's not their job. It's not their strength. It's not a great hardship that they haven't developed a unique way of expressing themselves. But for the ones that would have that, it would be terrible to deprive them of that. I want to look at the workplace here, because the workplace is a big driver, and one of the main goals of education is to prepare students for the workplace. The workplace does not care if the employee learns anything. The workplace only cares that they produce the result. And if the result can be produced by AI, then that means they don't need as many employees. That's already being established. I want to quote from your paper here saying, for instance, automated decision support systems in healthcare and finance streamline operations and improve efficiency, but might also reduce the need for professionals to engage in independent critical analysis. This could result in a workforce that is highly efficient, yet potentially less capable of independent problem solving and critical evaluation. How would you summarize the risks that this poses to the future workforce and employers?
I mean, let's be honest. What's currently happening is that studies have shown that. I mean, I know one from Switzerland that Deloitte did with 1,000 employees, that the vast majority of employees use GenAI at the workplace, even in those cases where the company prohibits the use of it for whatever data restrictions or so. So they just do it on their own private devices. Now, the problem is, if you're offloading the thinking process, you have a short-term win, because now you become more efficient. You can give your supervisor, your boss, fast a response. You can even do tasks that you couldn't do before very quick. But at one point, when your employer realizes that it's not really you doing the work, and all you did is you were just saying in plain English, do that for me. At that point latest, if the majority of your output is based on that, they would not pay you your salary, because why to pay you a high salary for that? Or they would start replacing, let's say, 5 employees with one who is just prompting with half the salary of a previous employee that you had. So this will definitely lead to you pretty much work on your own replacement. The thing is, if you would use it in a different way, that you actually still contribute to the output, right? Not just tell it, do the work for me. I mean, nobody will pay you in 2 years to tell an AI, do the work, right? I mean, that, that someone can do for 100 people. But if, and currently and this is the second study that I was talking about, which is currently in publication process, has shown where we were testing human alone with the task. GenAI got the same question, so AI alone, then human and AI together, but unguided, and then guided use of GenAI together with human. So we had those 4 scenarios, 3 where humans are involved, and the outcome was pretty clear. So even the result, human and AI together without guidance, was just a little bit better than the human alone or AI alone. But with the right use of GenAI, we saw an increase from 40 to 60% quality outcome of how the task had been solved. And the critical thinking improves during that process. But it was as well clear that it is so difficult for users to use it in the correct way. Like I said, even critical thinkers would use it in the wrong way. They would offload. They get directly impacted by the output that the AI creates. And their thinking process over the next steps is so limited now because they were using GenAI first, that if they would use it in a different way, in the guided way, they would actually accelerate with the output and would increase the critical thinking. And that can be really fun, but it's difficult. And that's where the problem is on the job, right? When we look at the job market, you said it. We see as well that more and more companies are now introducing GenAI at the workplace. For example, Microsoft's Copilot. I know big multinational companies that introduced just over the past months Microsoft Copilot, and they encourage the users to use this GenAI product. So if you use it in the wrong way and you just offload and you let it do all your job, you're pretty much working on your own replacement. But no one teaches neither employees nor at university students or at school how to use it in such a way that I increase my own contribution to the output. And this is where the risk is. And that's a societal problem, not just for the individual participant, meaning the employee, that they might replace themselves. What we get is as well generally mediocre outputs. We are no longer getting really those very critical, creative ideas. If we offload, what we get is okay answers, but mediocre. It's not going to be outstanding. And I always give the example, when you look at the candle, right, and you ask GenAI to further develop the candle, it will produce the best candle you have ever seen. It will probably last hundreds of hours, will have the brightest light ever seen, and the cheapest ever been created. But it will not be able to create the light bulb, because that is a different way. It goes for efficiency, it goes for improvement, but it cannot make the step from a candle to the light bulb. That's a totally different universe. For that, you need the human brain. But if we no longer have that in the workplace, right? If people no longer have this kind of thinking because they are offloading, because we are only focusing on efficiency, if we only focus on fast answers, fast results, yes, then GenAI is going to create that. But it will not create new ideas. There's not going to be any more development. Actually, we will end up in mediocrity. And that is currently not yet visible for most companies. They only see the efficiency effect. They just see that in a shorter time we can do more things and it will cost us less. And that's where it's a big trap for corporations as well. not just for the individual employee.
Well, and to try not to sound elitist, but probably failing, most people are average. And so most jobs will be structured in a way that they can be performed by the average person. And if that means that it can be done by AI, then there is a risk. There's no question that the further you get to the right of the normal distribution, the more these differences and inadequacies of AI show up. And that's where we need to be able to describe the fit between humans and AI so that it's like putting on a glove that lets you pick up things, and maybe it's an Iron Man glove and lets you lift really heavy things, but you've got to find the fit because maybe it's got a whole lot more or fewer fingers and so forth. And that's what we're trying to do right now.
But the problem, if I may, companies already approach me and say, Michael, what shall I do? The jobs that we gave graduates years ago are currently being done by AI. What work shall we give graduates? It is not even going to the point, right? It starts already earlier. The question, when you actually, it's not just for the average jobs, it's as well for the jobs that lead to the knowledge workers, high-level managers, because they start somewhere. And now the entrance is missing, right? The first steps are gone because AI has those steps. And I have in the UK, for example, a huge car manufacturer. They asked me to talk to their employees about the cognitive offloading when it comes to AI, and they currently still have a regulation saying that AI cannot be used if the use of AI would lead to the replacement of the employee. But that is all, how to say,
temporary.
Very limited. And I had a conversation with them, and I said, like we had the conversation. And then they said, oh, Mike, you're actually right. We see the problems already with our programmers, with the coders, that actually the young coders that we have, they depend too much on AI. They don't have the knowledge anymore. And we see that they already create a gap there. Yes, we have the senior programmers. They are already there and they can do all the work. But the young ones can't do that. They can be replaced by AI. And this is now, how do you get from a young, unexperienced coder who is being replaced by AI to the senior coder that you still need? This was a process where people learned and developed. Now, if the entrance steps are all gone, how are we going to do that? So the problem is actually a lot bigger, and it's not just limited to, let's say, simpler jobs. It's definitely impacting all jobs that we have, because all jobs start somewhere. Even with your Princeton, Harvard, or whatever education, you are not directly getting the CEO job. You're not directly being the chief of expert of something in the organization. Still, even with the best education, you start somewhere. And even those starting levels are now at risk due to AI.
Right. That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, because those senior coders start out as junior coders. And if you cut off the supply of junior coders, then you won't get any senior coders in the future. And we've heard about on the show examples of this also happening in medicine and law. So that's a big problem, because those entry-level positions, if they can be done by AI, will mean that we don't have the supply of people to learn how to become seniors. That's the end of the first half of the interview, and we'll conclude it next week. The idea that there are many people using GenAI for pretty much everything is worth a second, third, 15th rethink. A revolutionary technology that changes everything would have that effect, right? It would be like saying you use electricity all the time. Of course you do. You're using some right now to listen to me. But the possibility that we're giving up something of ourselves in that process is what demands that critical examination. I know, there have been people saying pretty much the same kind of thing about every technology back to the invention of writing. But I have experienced for myself just how something I needed became lost when I relied on AI too much or the wrong way, and it took an extraordinary amount of self-awareness to notice it. Will that turn out to be another false alarm in the catalog of Cassandras? It's something I'm focused on finding out as soon as possible. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI, Maybe you've heard of the Darwin Awards, those posthumous awards for spectacularly reckless acts that removed someone from the gene pool. Well, now there's an AI version of them, although you don't have to kill yourself to qualify. Just abuse or misuse AI in a notably eye-rolling way. Examples from this year's awardees are the Taco Bell drive-thru, which was discontinued after it was annoying enough to prompt some customers to retaliate by, say, ordering 18,000 cups of water. I don't condone that response, but it is certainly an example of your market trying to tell you something. Then there's GPT-5, which was jailbroken within an hour of its release. And the attorneys for MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, who submitted a brief in his trial for defamation, which contained nearly 30 defective citations, misquotes, and references to completely fictional court cases. And then there was McDonald's deploying an AI chatbot named Olivia, but making the password to its security system 123456, which led to the exposure of information for 64 million job candidates. A strong set of winners for this year. Can they be beaten in 2026? We'll see. Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Michael Gerlich, when we'll talk about whether or how we can tell that our cognition has been impaired, how the future of work will change with cognitive offloading, and what employers need to be aware of and leverage. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.